Okay, hold on. I'll jump to that boat and then down onto him. Oh, yeah. Okay. Come on, man. That's right. Down there. There we go. There we go. This is my new favourite VR game, and no one can tell me otherwise. I'm having the time of my life. Hello there everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let me just start this video by saying thank you so much for being here to watch this particular review. Assassin's Creed Nexus is probably the biggest and most important new VR game releasing in 2023, and with that comes far more coverage than we typically get for a VR game. The big outlets and channels like IGN, GameSpot, Eurogamer will probably be covering this game and reviewing it, because it's an Assassin's Creed game. So if you've chosen to come here and watch this review and listen to my opinion, that means the world to me, because at times like this, usually the smaller creators like me get pushed out by the bigger outlets because they have more reach. So it's great to see you here. Thank you so much for showing up. Now let me get straight into this. I haven't had this much fun with a highly polished, gorgeous looking and lengthy VR standalone title since Resident Evil 4 or perhaps Red Matter 2. I'm setting the bar pretty high, but honestly, for me personally, Assassin's Creed Nexus is an absolute triumph. The way that Ubisoft have managed to maneuver, bend and mold the core Assassin's Creed experience from a flat screen game into a fully fledged virtual reality experience is absolute perfection, and I've had so much fun playing this game for the last 3 weeks. I've blasted through the campaign, I've played a few missions a couple of times because I really enjoyed them, and overall, I'm very positive about this experience, much more positive than I ever expected to be. I went in with fairly low expectations. There were some rumblings last year that the game wasn't in great shape, and although I don't typically listen to rumour, I did let that worm its way in, and I built a very low expectation of this game. And maybe that was a good thing, because I've come in and it has blown me away. The polish, the attention to detail, the level of interactivity, the suite of accessibility features, the length of the campaign, the voice acting, the music, the visuals. It's genuinely impressive. This is one of the best titles on the Quest platform, and it's come at a really key and important time for Meta. Meta needed an exclusive VR game that could really sell their new Quest 3, and I truly believe that Assassin's Creed Nexus is that game. Now before we get into the meat of this review, the good, the bad and the ugly, let me just give you a general story overview for what's happening in Assassin's Creed Nexus. What are you doing? What's the point of this game? What is this game about? Now if you're like me and you've been playing the Assassin's Creed games for years, I've been playing them since 2007 when the original came out, you'll probably agree that the story hasn't been amazing since those first few games. Assassin's Creed 1, 2 and through the kind of Brotherhood Ezio saga, things were amazing. The story felt like it was building to something really cool. This ancient battle between Templars and Assassins that had raged for centuries, and it was eventually going to spill over into the modern day. That storyline kind of took a back seat around those first few games, and since then we've just been kind of going back in time and embodying different assassins in different time periods, and the modern day overarching story has kind of been inconsequential. So in Assassin's Creed Nexus, the evil Abstergo Corporation have headhunted you, the player, to use the Animus to go back in time and embody the lives of 3 key assassins in 3 different time periods. You've got Ezio in 15th century Renaissance Italy, you've got Kassandra in ancient Greece, and you've got Connor Kenway in 18th century colonial America. Why are you being sent back to these periods in time? You're looking for a magical MacGuffin. You're looking for a device. As always, Abstergo, the Templars, they want you to find a device that will give them some kind of power in the modern world and allow them to essentially take over and control the world. But little do they know you're also working as a double agent in this story. You're working for the Brotherhood, and they're tasking you with planting bombs in these memories instead of just planting tracking devices to tell Abstergo where the magical MacGuffin is. The overarching story, much like most Assassin's Creed games at this point, is a little messy. It's gripping enough and it's voice acted beautifully and the music is great, so you are pulled in. You do believe in the plight of these characters, but it isn't something that I was particularly worried about following. I was more enjoying the minute-to-minute gameplay, the action, and the experience of actually embodying some of the best assassins from this franchise. So that's the story of Nexus. It's there, but it certainly isn't the driving force behind why you'll play this game for 15-20 hours from start to finish. Okay, let's start with the good aspects of Assassin's Creed Nexus. The first thing I want to talk about is the feeling of playing this game, what it feels like to engage with the core gameplay loop of Assassin's Creed Nexus. Well, this feels like a proper Assassin's Creed game, and that might seem like a weird sentence to say, it might sound like a redundant statement to make, but going in I truly thought that Ubisoft would have to cut some corners somewhere to get the full core Assassin's Creed experience into virtual reality, or at the very least onto a standalone piece of VR hardware. But the truth is, they really haven't had to cut corners almost anywhere. Now, if you think about an Assassin's Creed game, you'll probably immediately think about climbing any building you want to, doing parkour across the rooftops, assassinating enemies with your hidden blades and other suite of tools that you may have available to you, hiding in haystacks, hiding amongst crowds, stealth elements, etc, etc. All of that is here. Everything I've just mentioned you can do in glorious virtual reality. You can flick out your hidden blades and take down any enemy you want. You can even jump from the rooftops and assassinate an enemy down on the ground, and it feels so sweet. Even crazy things like eagle jumping from the highest point in the level, hundreds of feet down to a hay bale on the floor, you can do it in VR. From the moment I stepped foot into this game, my first thought was, can I climb everything? I ran to the first building I could see and I started to climb it. You really can mantle up pretty much any surface. Flat walls you often won't be able to grab, but if you go to the corner of a building, you can mantle there. It's genuinely impressive how all the core elements of Assassin's Creed Flat have transferred into VR in an authentic and enjoyable way. Now, there is one element that might be a point of contention, and I'll get onto that in the bad section, but for the most part, this feels like an Assassin's Creed game. Everything you can do in Assassin's Creed Flat, you can do here in Assassin's Creed VR, but it feels so much more immersive and so much more rewarding because you're doing it yourself. So when you throw a throwing knife at one enemy, chop another one down with your sword, and then leap off of a roof to take down an enemy on the floor with your hidden blade, believe me, it feels so sweet. The core feeling of playing this game is perfect. Ubisoft have nailed it. This is a true Assassin's Creed game. The second positive thing that I want to talk about today is the freedom to tackle objectives and levels in any way that you see fit. Now, when I reviewed Vampire the Masquerade, I spoke about a kind of illusion of freedom that game had. That game is a stealth game through and through, and as soon as you started to deviate away from stealth as your main playstyle, things kind of fell apart and you felt extremely underpowered. Now, that is not the case with Assassin's Creed Nexus. Once again, very true to the core feeling of the franchise in general, you can play these missions in any way that you want, even though it's marketed as a stealth game, and the primary tools that you have are stealth-based tools. You can sneak along, blending in with crowds of NPCs, hiding in hay bales, taking people out from the shadows. But if that's not your style, and you just want to run in with your sword or bow and start chopping these enemies down and taking them on head on, you can do that. It's entirely up to you how you play this game. Now, I will say there are a couple of missions in the campaign where deviating away from stealth is a fail state, but it's certainly not every single mission. In these stealth-based missions, you have to play it without being seen. The second you're seen, you go back to a checkpoint. Again, very similar to the core entries in the Assassin's Creed franchise. But for the most part, it's entirely up to you, the player, how you tackle these missions. So if you don't like stealth and that is a worry for you going into Assassin's Creed Nexus, worry not. The third positive thing that I need to talk about today is the visual aesthetic and level of polished presentation that this game has. This is a gorgeous looking standalone VR game. I truly didn't think it would look anywhere near as good as the promotional materials made it look before release, but I'm very happy to be wrong. I played through the entire game on Quest 3 and it is a gorgeous game. Special shout out has to go to the environments themselves. Italy, ancient Greece, and colonial America all look absolutely stunning. Ancient Greece is probably my favourite. It's the brightest, the blue skies, the blue water, the green rolling hills. It's just such a lovely environment and level to spend time in VR. I could walk around the streets of any of these environments for hours, just taking in the atmosphere. And it is a game packed with atmosphere. Yes, it looks beautiful, but it all comes together because the streets are so densely packed with NPCs, and they aren't just window dressing. If you bump into these people, they will talk to you, they'll say something. If you draw your weapon or start to get aggressive, they'll panic, and then they'll run away eventually if you keep waving your sword around in the middle of a street. It feels like a real place. It's a very densely packed environment. All of them are densely packed environments that feel alive and real. And the presentation, the attention to detail, and the visuals really help to hammer that home. I will say that NPCs themselves look gorgeous, but a few of the characters you interact with in the story are a little bit kind of stone-faced when you talk to them. Not the best facial animations when you're talking to key characters, but everything else looks absolutely stunning. This is one of the best looking games on the Quest 3. The fourth positive thing that I need to shout out today is the length of the campaign and the length of the levels in general. You will all be glad to hear that this is not a short game, especially if you play it and try to accomplish all of the side objectives and collect all of the collectibles. Some of these levels, most of these levels in fact, took me upwards of an hour to complete because I was so mesmerized by them and I wanted to do everything within the level. But even just following the main missions, some of these levels are really lengthy. This is a proper length VR game. It spans 16 different missions and you jump between each of the assassins in a sporadic order. So you won't play Ezio's missions first and then move to Kassandra and then move to Connor. You'll jump between the three, and I think that gives the game a nice pacing and a nice balance because you're never rooted in one environment for too long. You move to a completely different setting quite often. It's just so great that these missions took me so long. I was worried this would be a short game, but it's easily 12 to probably 20 hours depending on how you play. Each of the levels are packed with extra objective, things like parkour challenges, climbing challenges, shooting range challenges, little bits of historic information that you can pick up and find, which is very key to the Assassin's Creed franchise, and then things like collectible coins that you need to find within the levels. So if you go for all of the side objectives as well as playing the main story, you'll easily get, I would say, 15 to 20 hours, probably closer to 20 hours out of this campaign. This is a lengthy product. Yes, it's a pricier VR game, but I think it more than justifies its price point based on the amount of content on show here. The fifth positive thing about Assassin's Creed Nexus is the incredible suite of accessibility options available to players. Ubisoft have nailed this aspect. In 2023, I'm still playing some VR games where I have no options at all, no accessibility options. I only have snap turn as my primary way of turning around, or I don't have any vignettes, things like that. And I might not use these features, but I know some people need them. Assassin's Creed has pretty much everything you could need for a VR game to be accessible to the widest audience possible. We've got smooth turn, we've got snap turn, we've got smooth locomotion, we've got hand-oriented turning, we've got head-oriented turning, we've got a fear of heights mode that lays a grid on the floor around you if you don't like being up too high. You can scale your vignettes. This game has a wonderful suite of accessibility options. I'll run some gameplay showing what they are because I can't remember them all off the top of my head right now, but the menu is extensive. Now, I like to play these games as immersive as possible, so I switch it all off. But if you do suffer from motion sickness or a fear of heights, this game's got you covered. You don't need to worry. You can still climb to the highest point in these levels and you can enable a fear of heights mode that will lay a grid around you to make you feel like the solid floor is there. It's stuff like that, it's that attention to detail that shows that Ubisoft really cared about this product, and it really cared about making it as accessible as physically possible so the widest audience of people could play it. And I really respect that in a time where still a lot of VR games aren't getting this element right. This is a highly polished, full-length Assassin's Creed game where you're time hopping between 3 very gorgeous different locations, and you can tackle these lengthy missions in whatever way you see fit, and it all feels so good. Physically assassinating people with your hidden blade, taking them down with your bow, climbing these buildings, jumping off the top of them. It's a wonderful experience. Ubisoft have absolutely nailed it. But that being said, there are a few bad points, and I'm going to touch on them right now. But before we dive headfirst into the negative aspects, I want to talk about something that straddles the line between both good and bad, and that's the combat in Assassin's Creed Nexus. Now, for the most part, I really enjoy the combat. I love using the bow, the crossbow, the throwing knives, and the hidden blade. All of these tools make me feel like an absolute badass, and they're executed amazingly well. But the sword fighting feels a little sloppy, messy, and light when it comes to my own personal preferences. Now, this certainly isn't a blade and sorcery style game. You won't feel your sword colliding with your enemy or going through them as if they're a physical object. When you swing your sword, it feels more like you're swinging through an enemy. It's very arcadey, it doesn't feel like you're actually making any kind of contact with them. But that isn't my core issue with the combat. I think the sword fighting tries to do a little bit too much. There's dodging, ducking, blocking, parrying, rushing towards an enemy, and a whole suite of other things that you need to take into account. And often that's fine if you're fighting one enemy at one time, but if there's a group of 3 or maybe even more enemies, the combat devolves into a sloppy and disjointed affair. Or at least it does for me. Maybe it just takes a little bit more time to click with it, but I thought it was worth shouting out because I've completed the game and I never felt like I fully clicked with this aspect of the combat. As I said, bows, crossbows, throwing knives, hidden blades all feel great, but the sword fighting feels a little bit overwhelming. The game gives the player a lot to remember and a lot to take notice of, and when it gets hectic and you're fighting more than just one enemy, it often devolves into just swinging your sword around and hoping for the best. At least it does for me. Perhaps if there was more weight to the actions and it was a more physical driven sword fighting game, it would feel better, but because it's quite arcadey, it does feel quite weightless and a little bit sloppy. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing. I think it will just boil down to your personal preference and what you're looking for in this kind of game with this kind of action and combat. The first negative thing that I need to say about Assassin's Creed Nexus is probably going to be a point of contention in the VR community in general. I imagine people will debate this and speak about it as the weeks go on. If you've played any flat screen Assassin's Creed game, you'll know that to get your character to do any of the parkour elements, you just hold down A or X, depending on the platform you play on, and then you just run forward, and your character kind of takes over. It's a hands-off approach. Once you're holding down A and maneuvering forward, your character will mantle and jump and swing their way across the environment. It's a seamless experience, and it is very hands-off. It's implemented the exact same way in VR. So in Nexus, you hold down A and you start running forward, and your character will do all the mantling, jumping, and maneuvering across the environments for you. The only time you have to take control and get a hands-on approach is if you're not quite going to make a jump. You need to grab the ledge and pull yourself up. So it doesn't really feel like you are the character in those moments. It does feel very cool and it is very seamless and it helps keep the pacing up, but it feels very hands-off. I wish there was something that kind of made you feel like you were doing these parkour actions, because although it's cool, it does feel more like driving your character across a level than embodying your character and moving them across a level, if that makes any kind of sense. So parkour in this is very true to the flat screen games, possibly to a fault. The second negative thing that I wanted to say about Assassin's Creed Nexus is VR Jank meets Assassin's Creed Jank. Now, if you've played any flat screen Assassin's Creed game, you'll know that they have their fair share of jankiness. Often, if you're trying to mantle or climb somewhere, your character won't necessarily go the way you want them to, and they'll start mantling or climbing somewhere else. Or you'll try and make a jump and your character will jump off in the wrong direction. That stuff is present in Assassin's Creed Nexus. It isn't quite as annoying as it is in a flat screen game, but I have encountered it. I've had jumps where my character randomly jumps off in the wrong direction or bounces off a surface and starts spiraling out of control. There is an element of jank, and when it's placed into VR, and VR has its own level of jankiness whereby you'll try and grab something but you'll grab the wrong item, or you'll try to use your hidden blade on someone but you'll kind of go through them or past them and they'll end up behind you attacking you. Those two things kind of coalesce and create some super jank at times. It isn't game breaking, it is more hilarious than frustrating, but it is there. This is a very polished game, but don't go in expecting there to be no jank. There is some jank, often with climbing and grabbing objects in your environment. It doesn't always work the way you kind of want it to, and you'll often find yourself grabbing something you're not intending to grab. So expect a little bit of jankiness, certainly not game breaking or deal breaking. The third negative aspect probably won't bother anyone because I don't think people turn up to Assassin's Creed for the story at this point, but the story isn't fantastic. That overarching narrative of being sent back to find some magical MacGuffin for an evil corporation, I wasn't super invested in it. What I was invested in was the stories of the assassins in their own time periods. That feels more authentic, that feels more engaging, but the overarching story, I didn't really care. I've seen it played out in Assassin's Creed so many times and it never really builds to anything anymore, that the story comes second. It plays second fiddle to the actual experience of playing this game. Not a huge negative, but people who are coming into this for the first time might be a little disheartened to know that the story is kind of meh. It isn't super engaging. You're trying to find some magic artifact. That's kind of it. The final negative thing I have to say about Assassin's Creed Nexus is I would have liked a little bit more variation in the side quests available to me in these environments. Currently you have the main missions, parkour challenges, climbing challenges, shooting range challenges, and then collectibles. But what you'll notice when you're walking around these environments is some of the NPCs say very specific things. I encountered a few that had really interesting lines of dialogue. One particular one that springs to mind was an NPC who was being kind of shaken down or extorted by a bad guy. This guy was telling him that he owed him money, and this NPC seemed really scared and said, "I'm going to try and get it to you by next Tuesday," etc. But I couldn't go and do anything in that scenario. I couldn't jump down and speak to this NPC who was being extorted and then go and deal with the extortionist. I would have liked that because the world building is there. You'll often hear NPCs having really cool conversations that feel like they should be side quests, but they aren't side quests, and I would have liked that to be implemented. I appreciate this game is already absolutely stacked, there's a lot going on in it, but I think that would have just taken it up a notch to a different level, and I would have really appreciated that being built into the game. Would have made me spend even more time in these environments than I'm already spending in these environments. So yeah, not a big thing, but I would have liked a little bit more variation in the side quests and things available for me to do. Now normally at this point in the video I would talk about the ugly stuff. I break it down into good, bad and ugly. So here there would be the very worst aspects of the game. The truly egregious stuff that I have to call out. But for me personally, and my experience playing Assassin's Creed Nexus on Quest 3, I haven't encountered anything that deserves to sit in this section. Typically I would talk about terrible bugs, poor performance, subpar visuals, or maybe the content not quite justifying the price point. But Assassin's Creed hasn't thrown up anything in those categories that I feel needs to be called out in the ugly section. On Quest 3 at least, this is a great looking, great performing, relatively bug-free and content-packed game that I truly think does justify its price point. So I'm just going to sum up the video. Assassin's Creed Nexus is an absolute triumph and definitely one of the best VR games of 2023. Ubisoft have created an accessible, content-packed and true to the original franchise Assassin's Creed VR experience for the Quest platform that they should be very proud of, and I think will sell very, very well going into this Christmas period. To put it simply, Assassin's Creed Nexus is a killer app for the Quest family of hardware, and Meta should be marketing it as such. This is a huge achievement and I really hope it sells well. I really hope you all enjoy it if you're picking it up today, and I really hope you enjoyed this review. I can't wait to play more, and I truly hope we get a sequel. I want to play as more assassins in more gorgeous environments across the entire franchise in VR. It works so well, and now that they've got a foundation, hopefully they don't let it go to waste. Hope you've enjoyed, guys. If you have, please do leave a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you soon for another one. Take care. See you later.